The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning in late March, 4 months and 11 days into an arrangement that had always been cold, calculated, and carefully structured. I stood in the grand yet quiet parlor of Wentworth Manor, clutching a letter that had not been meant for my eyes. The wax seal, though broken, still bore the official mark of the Duke. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a brewing storm I hadn't been prepared for. Behind me, I heard the door open with that certain weight, one that told me the Duke himself had arrived. A soft, controlled sigh escaped my lips as I turned. "You're up early," Edmund Carver said, his voice slightly hoarse from sleep, but filled with the authority that defined him. His presence filled the room as he stood just beyond the threshold. His dark eyes locked with mine, but they showed nothing but cold restraint. "Yes, I was reading," I replied, my gaze falling to the letter in my hands. I could barely look him in the eye. He stopped. I knew why. I had turned to face him, and the letter was visible in my hand. Its wax seal broken, its secrets exposed. "It's from your solicitor," I said. My voice came out steady, which felt like its own small rebellion against the heat climbing my throat. "It arrived in yesterday's post, mixed with mine, apparently." Edmund's expression shuddered in the way it always did when confronted with something that required feeling rather than strategy. He was handsome in the morning light. I had stopped pretending I didn't notice, but just now his beauty felt like armor. "Clause 17, I continued, as if he hadn't tried to speak. "The one about expedited annulment procedures. I hadn't realized you'd ask Mr. Felton to begin drafting the documents already. We still have 3 months remaining." The silence that followed tasted like copper. Outside, London was waking, carriages rattling past, servants calling to one another in distant hallways, but the parlor existed in its own terrible stillness. "You weren't supposed to see that," Edmund said finally. I laughed, a sound without humor. "No, I suppose I wasn't supposed to see a great many things. Before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to where this all began, because you need to understand how a widow with nothing became a duchess with everything to lose. And if you love stories of forbidden love, impossible choices, and hearts that refuse to follow contracts, then stay with me. Subscribe to Velvet and Vintage Tales, because I promise you, what happens next will make you believe that some agreements are meant to be broken." It had started, as most disasters did, with desperation dressed as practicality. 7 months earlier, I had stood in a solicitor's office in Cheapside, my last decent dress pressed to stiffness, my pride the only thing holding me upright. My father's debts had been a noose tightening for years. His death 3 months prior had simply jerked it closed. The house was forfeit. My younger sister Violet's dowry was gone. The modest inheritance my late husband Thomas had left me had vanished into my father's gambling debts and bad investments. I had expected refusal when I requested an audience with the Duke of Kingsley. I had not expected him to agree. "You need money?" Edmund had said in that first meeting, seated across from me in a study so vast it echoed. "I need a wife for 7 months." I had stared at him. Edmund Carver was known throughout London as a man of rigid principle, cool logic, and absolutely no romantic inclinations. At 33, he had avoided marriage with the single-mindedness of a man fleeing plague. "I don't understand. My uncle died 2 months ago," Edmund had explained, with the careful precision of a man describing a business contract. He left his entire unentailed estate, including Thornfield Manor and its lands, to me, on one condition: that I be married within the year and remain so for no less than 7 months, a safeguard against hasty decisions, he claimed. He paused, his gray eyes assessing me with unsettling directness. The will specified marriage, Mrs. Wentworth. It did not specify love. The title had made me flinch. Widow's weeds at 26 felt like wearing someone else's life. My marriage to Thomas Wentworth had lasted 11 months before fever took him, brief enough that I still sometimes forgot to answer to Mrs. "Why me?" I had asked. Something had shifted in Edmund's expression then, the first crack in the perfect facade. because you need this arrangement as much as I do, because you won't expect anything beyond the terms, and because he had hesitated, then continued with brutal honesty, because you will leave when the 7 months are complete. No negotiations, no attempts to extend what was never meant to last. I should have heard the warning in those words. Instead, I had heard salvation. The contract had been drawn up within days. £1,000 upon signing, residence at Wentworth Manor in Mayfair for the duration, an additional £4,000 upon successful completion of the 7 months, with annulment papers filed immediately thereafter. Violet would be provided a modest dowry. All my father's debts would be cleared. In exchange, I would play the part of the Duchess of Kingsley in all public settings. I would attend the necessary social functions, maintain the household, and provide the appearance of a legitimate union. What happened in private was immaterial. The contract specified separate bedchambers, separate lives really, that happened to intersect at breakfast and the occasional ball. It was, Edmund had assured me, perfectly straightforward. He had been wrong. The first month had been easy enough. I learned the rhythms of Wentworth Manor when the Duke took his morning ride, when he preferred silence at breakfast, when he retreated to his study to manage his estates. I learned which servants were loyal, which were gossips, and which simply didn't care about the strange marriage that had materialized overnight. Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, had been the first to accept me. "You carry yourself well, Your Grace," she had said one morning as she showed me the linen closets. "That's all that matters in a house like this." I hadn't corrected her use of the title. Corrections would have invited questions I couldn't answer. The second month brought the social obligations: Lady Ashworth's garden party, the Beaumont ball, the theater with Lord and Lady Sinclair. Each event required me to stand at Edmund's side, my hand resting lightly on his arm, my smile practiced and serene. "They're watching us," I had whispered at the Beaumont ball, feeling the weight of 100 curious gazes. "Let them watch," Edmund had replied, his voice low. "We have nothing to hide." But we did, of course. We were hiding everything. It was during the 3rd month that things began to shift. Small things at first, Edmund asking about my sister over breakfast, commenting on a book I'd left in the morning room, pausing outside my chamber door as if he wanted to knock but thought better of it. I told myself it meant nothing. He was simply being courteous, fulfilling his end of the bargain by making the arrangement bearable. Then came the afternoon in the library. I had been searching for a volume of poetry when Edmund entered, still in his riding clothes, his dark hair windswept. He stopped when he saw me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "I didn't mean to disturb you," I said, though it was his library, his house, his right to enter any room he pleased. "You're not disturbing me." He crossed to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "Eleanor." It was the first time he'd used my given name outside of public performance. The sound of it in his voice, rough and uncertain, made something tighten in my chest. "Yes? Do you ever regret it? This arrangement?" The question caught me off guard. I set down the book I'd been holding, buying time to formulate an answer that wouldn't reveal too much. "Do you?" "I asked you first." I considered lying. It would have been safer. Instead, I said, "Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if we'd met under different circumstances. If there had been no contract, no desperation, no 7-month deadline." Edmund turned to face me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. And I think perhaps it would have been worse, because then I would have had hope. "Hope," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Is hope so terrible? When it's impossible?" "Yes." He took a step toward me, then another. The space between us felt both vast and suffocating. "Eleanor, The library door burst open. Violet rushed in, breathless and flushed, her bonnet askew. "Ellie, you must come quickly. There's a woman at the door demanding to see the Duke. She says it's urgent." "She says..." Violet's eyes darted to Edmund, then back to me. "She says she knows the truth about your marriage." The world seemed to tilt. Edmund's face went carefully blank, that mask of control sliding back into place with practiced ease. "What is her name?" "Lady Vivian Lockhart." I felt the blood drain from my face. Vivian Lockhart, the woman Edmund, had been expected to marry before his uncle's death, the woman who had made no secret of her fury, when Edmund had suddenly wed an unknown widow instead. "Show her to the drawing room," Edmund said, his voice ice. "Tell her we will join her momentarily." Violet nodded and fled, clearly sensing the tension that had flooded the room. When she was gone, I turned to Edmund. "She knows, or suspects. Either way, this is nothing," Edmund interrupted, though his clenched jaw betrayed him. "Vivian has no proof. She's fishing. All we need to do is present a united front." "A united front," I echoed hollowly. "Edmund, if she can prove this marriage is a sham, if she can demonstrate it was entered solely for inheritance, the will can be contested. Everything will be forfeit." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "I know what's at stake, Eleanor. Believe me, I know." "Violet," I whispered, pressing a hand to my stomach, fighting nausea. "If this falls apart, she'll have nothing. She'll end up exactly where I was." "It won't fall apart." Edmund crossed to me, close enough now that I could see the storm brewing in his gray eyes. "I won't allow it. You can't simply decree." "Watch me." His jaw set with that particular stubbornness I had learned meant immovable resolve. "Vivian suspects. She does not know. And even if she did, a contracted marriage is not illegal, merely unusual. What we need is to remove all doubt, to present a united front so convincing that suspicion becomes impossible." I looked at him, this man who had been a stranger 4 months ago, whose morning coffee preferences I now knew by heart, whose rare smiles had become the high point of my carefully measured days. "How? We attend every event, every ball, every dinner, every tedious garden party. We are seen together constantly. We are affectionate in public. He hesitated, something flickering across his face. "We behave as though this arrangement has become something more." The irony tasted like ash. "We pretend to be in love. Yes, for 3 more months. And then?" Edmund's expression shuddered again, that careful blankness descending like a curtain. "And then the 7 months conclude as agreed. The annulment proceeds. You receive your funds and your freedom." Freedom. The word should have sounded like relief. Instead, it sounded like an ending. "All right," I said, because what else could I say? Violet's future hung in the balance. My own survival depended on seeing this through. "We play the part." "We play the part," Edmund echoed. Neither of us acknowledged the possibility that for at least one of us, it might no longer be pretending at all. We found Vivian in the drawing room, arranged on the settee like a queen granting audience. She wore a gown of deep crimson, deliberately bold, a challenge disguised as fashion. Her dark hair was perfectly coiffed, her posture immaculate, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Your Grace," she said to Edmund, her curtsy shallow enough to border on insult. Then to me, "Mrs. Wentworth." The use of my maiden name landed like a slap. "Lady Vivian," Edmund said coolly, positioning himself beside my chair, his hand coming to rest on its back in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. "Mrs. Pemberton mentioned urgency." "Indeed." Vivian settled more comfortably, her movements languid and deliberate. "I thought it only charitable to warn you that certain questions are being raised about the rather sudden nature of your marriage, the lack of courtship, the complete absence of the new Duchess at any meaningful events prior to your wedding." I felt Edmund go still beside me, though his voice remained level. "We are private people. I fail to see how that concerns you." "Ah, but it concerns everyone when the Duke of Kingsley marries in what appears to be unseemly haste." Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes, particularly when the bride is a widow of such limited background. One begins to wonder about motivations, about inheritances that require marriage, about arrangements. The last word hung in the air like poison. "You are suggesting?" Edmund's voice had gone dangerously soft. "I am suggesting nothing, Your Grace. I am merely observing what others have begun to notice, that your Duchess seems remarkably comfortable with the idea of temporary residence, that she has made no changes to the household, that she wears no family jewels." Vivian's gaze flicked to my bare throat with deliberate cruelty. That she carries herself less like a woman in love and more like a woman playing a part. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face serene through years of practice at hiding desperation. Perhaps, I said quietly, I am simply a woman who recognizes that love and flash are not the same thing. Charming, Vivian murmured. One wonders what the matrons of Almack's will think, whether they will remain so charmed when they learn that the Duke of Kingsley's marriage is little more than what did I hear? A 7-month audition for a fortune. Edmund rose in one fluid movement, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. You will leave my house, he said, each word carved from ice. You will not speak of my wife again. You will not spread gossip or innuendo. If you do, I will ensure that every door in London closes to you. I have that power, Lady Vivian. Do not test whether I have the will. For a moment, fear flickered across Vivian's face. Then her smile sharpened. Of course, Your Grace. I meant no offense. I simply thought you should know what is being whispered. She stood, smoothed her skirts with exaggerated care. Do send my regards to your uncle's solicitor. I hear he's been quite busy lately. She left with the satisfaction of someone who had already drawn blood. When the door closed, Edmund turned to me, his carefully maintained control finally cracking. She knows about the annulment papers, or suspects strongly enough to gamble on it. We knew this was a risk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Someone noticing, someone questioning. If she can prove the marriage is a sham, if she can demonstrate it was entered solely for inheritance, the will can be contested. His voice was raw now, stripped of pretense. Eleanor, I need you to understand what that means. Not just for me, but for Violet, for you. Everything we've done, everything we've endured, it will have been for nothing. I stood, needing to move, needing air, needing something other than the suffocating weight of his words. Then we do exactly what you said. We convince London that this marriage is real, that we are, the words stuck in my throat, in love. Edmund finished. He crossed to me, his hands reaching for mine before he seemed to think better of it. Can you do that, Eleanor? Can you pretend with the whole of London watching? I looked up at him, at the man who held my future in his hands, who had offered me salvation with one breath and expiration with another. Can you? Something flashed in his eyes, something that looked dangerously like honesty. I don't know if it will be pretending. The admission hung between us, fragile and terrifying. Edmund, don't, he said quickly. Don't say anything. Not yet. Not until we've survived this. Just help me convince them. Help me protect what we've built, even if it's built on sand. What we've built. As if this cold arrangement had become something worth protecting. As if 4 months of careful distance had somehow transformed into something neither of us had names for. All right, I whispered. We'll make them believe. He exhaled, relief flooding his features. Thank you. But as I stood there in the drawing room of Wentworth Manor, with Edmund Carver looking at me as if I were something precious rather than something purchased, I realized the terrible truth. I wouldn't be pretending at all. I had broken the only rule that mattered. I had let it become real. And in 3 months, when the contract expired and the annulment was finalized, pretending to have a heart to break would be far easier than admitting I'd already lost mine. The first test came 3 days later at the Ashworth Ball. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, my hand resting on Edmund's arm, and fought the urge to flee. The ballroom below glittered with 1,000 candles, and every eye had turned to watch our entrance. Breathe, Edmund murmured, low enough that only I could hear. You look magnificent. I did, actually. The gown was sapphire silk, cut to perfection, with the Kingsley diamonds at my throat. Edmund's first action after Vivian's visit had been to retrieve the family jewels from their vault and insist I wear them. The necklace was heavy, cold against my skin, a chain made of light and obligation. They're all staring, I whispered. Good. Let them stare. Let them see exactly what Vivian claimed they wouldn't, a duchess who belongs at her duke's side. His words should have steadied me. Instead, they made my chest tighten with the weight of what we were about to do. We were walking into a room full of society's most influential members, and we were going to lie to every single one of them. Or at least, Edmund would be lying. I was no longer certain what I would be doing. We descended the stairs together, and I felt the shift in the room's energy. Whispers rustled like silk. Fans fluttered with increased urgency. Lady Ashworth herself swept forward to greet us, her smile wide and calculating. "Your Grace, how wonderful to see you. And the Duchess, my dear, you are positively radiant. That necklace is exquisite. A family heirloom," Edmund said smoothly, his hand moving from my arm to the small of my back. The touch sent heat through the layers of silk and stays. "It suits her, don't you think?" Indeed. Lady Ashworth's eyes missed nothing. Not the necklace, not Edmund's proprietary touch, not the way I leaned almost imperceptibly into him. "You must tell me your secret, Duchess. How did you capture the heart of London's most determined bachelor?" The question was a trap, delicately laid. I could feel the attention of nearby guests sharpening, conversation dying away as people strained to hear my answer. "I didn't capture anything, Lady Ashworth," I said, keeping my voice light but sincere. "Edmund simply saw past what everyone else assumed they knew about him, and I was fortunate enough that he saw something in me worth knowing. It wasn't a lie. That was the dangerous part. Every word was true, even if the truth wasn't what Lady Ashworth imagined." Edmund's hand pressed slightly more firmly against my back, approval or warning. I couldn't tell. "My wife is too modest. She captivated me the moment we met." "How romantic," Lady Ashworth cooed, though her eyes remained shrewd. "You must join us for whist later. Lord Ashworth is eager to discuss your agricultural reforms, Your Grace." As we moved deeper into the ballroom, Edmund's hand never left my back. We were stopped every few feet. Lord Pemberton wanting to discuss Parliament, Lady Sinclair inquiring about my sister, the Honourable Mr. Fitzwilliam asking Edmund about his horses. Through it all, Edmund maintained the performance with flawless precision. A smile here, a laugh there, his attention constantly returning to me as if pulled by invisible strings. "You're very good at this," I murmured during a brief moment of relative privacy. "At what?" "Pretending." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, I've had years of practice." Before I could ask what he meant, the music shifted. The opening strains of a waltz filled the air, and Edmund turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a command either. It was something else, something that made my pulse quicken and my palms dampen inside my gloves. "Edmund, I don't think. Everyone is watching, Eleanor. They're waiting to see if the Duke of Kingsley will dance with his own wife. If we refuse, if we show even a moment of hesitation, Vivian wins." He was right. I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on us like a physical force. This was the moment that would either confirm or destroy the image we were trying to build. I placed my hand in his. "Then let's give them something to talk about." The waltz floor was crowded, but somehow when Edmund led me into position, everyone else seemed to fade into insignificance. His hand settled at my waist. Mine rested on his shoulder. We were closer than we'd been since the day I discovered the annulment papers, close enough that I could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "I haven't danced in years," I admitted as we began to move. "Neither have I." His grip tightened slightly. "Don't think, just follow." So I did. And somewhere between the first turn and the second, something shifted. The performance became something else, something more dangerous. Edmund's hand at my waist felt less like obligation and more like possession. The way he looked at me wasn't the calculated gaze of a man playing a part, but something rawer, more honest. "You're staring," I whispered. "I know." He didn't look away. "Everyone expects me to be besotted with my bride. I'm simply meeting expectations." "Are you?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Too revealing, too desperate. Edmund's eyes darkened, and for a heartbeat I thought he might answer honestly. Then his expression shuddered, that familiar mask sliding back into place. "What do you think, Eleanor?" Before I could respond, a voice cut through the music. How touching. We both turned. Vivian stood at the edge of the dance floor, her crimson gown a slash of warning against the pastels surrounding her. She wasn't alone. Beside her stood an older gentleman I didn't recognize, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to power. Edmund's entire body went rigid. "Bancroft, Your Grace." The man inclined his head with just enough deference to be polite and just enough restraint to suggest he considered himself Edmund's equal. "What a delightful surprise seeing you here, with your bride." The emphasis on the last word made my stomach clench. "Eleanor," Edmund said, his voice carefully controlled, "may I present Lord Bancroft? He was my uncle's solicitor. Lord Bancroft, my wife, Eleanor." My wife? He'd never called me that before, not with that particular edge of steel in his voice. "A pleasure, Your Grace." Bancroft's gaze swept over me with clinical assessment. "I had hoped to meet you under less public circumstances. There are certain matters regarding your husband's inheritance that require clarification." "This is hardly the time or place," Edmund said coldly. "Isn't it?" Vivian's smile was all teeth. "I thought public occasions were precisely where one demonstrated the legitimacy of one's commitments. Lord Bancroft was just telling me how unusual it is for a marriage to be contracted with such specific temporal parameters." The music continued around us, but I felt as if we were standing in the eye of a storm. Other dancers were beginning to notice our frozen tableau. Whispers started again, sharper this time, more urgent. "I don't know what you think you've discovered," Edmund said, his voice low and dangerous, "but I suggest you consider very carefully before making accusations you cannot prove." "Accusations?" Bancroft raised an eyebrow. "I'm merely doing my due diligence, Your Grace. Your uncle's will was very specific about the nature of the marriage required to inherit. It must be entered in good faith, with the intent of permanence. If it should come to light that the marriage was merely a temporary arrangement, designed to circumvent the spirit of the will, that's enough." I hadn't meant to speak. The words simply erupted from some deep well of protective fury I hadn't known I possessed. "Lord Bancroft, I don't know what Lady Vivian has told you, but I can assure you that my marriage to Edmund was entered in entirely good faith." It was true. I had entered it in good faith. Faith that I could maintain emotional distance. Faith that 7 months would pass without consequence. Faith that my heart would remain uninvolved. The fact that my faith had been misplaced didn't make the initial intent any less genuine. "I'm certain it was, Your Grace," Bancroft said smoothly. "However, certain documents have come to my attention." "Documents that are none of your concern." Edmund's voice cut like a blade. "The terms of my uncle's will have been met. I am married, as required. What occurs within that marriage is between my wife and myself. Unless you have evidence of actual fraud, Lord Bancroft, I suggest you remember who signs your retainer." The threat hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Bancroft's expression flickered just for a moment, with something that might have been fear or might have been calculation. "Of course, Your Grace. I meant no offense. I simply wish to ensure." "You've ensured enough." Edmund's hand found mine again, his fingers interlacing with my own in a gesture that was definitely not part of any contract we'd signed. "Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have other engagements this evening." He led me away from the dance floor, away from Vivian's triumphant smile and Bancroft's calculating gaze, away from the whispers that followed us like smoke. We moved through the crowded ballroom with singular purpose, Edmund's hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel his pulse hammering against my palm, or perhaps that was my own pulse. I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. We found sanctuary in a small library off the main corridor. Edmund closed the door behind us and leaned against it, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "They have the annulment papers?" he said, his voice rough. That's what Bancroft was implying. Vivian somehow got her hands on the preliminary drafts, and now they're going to argue that the marriage was never meant to be permanent, that it was a sham from the beginning. I sank into the nearest chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The sapphire gown pooled around me like water, and the Kingsley diamonds felt like a noose. Can they do that? Can they actually contest the will based on intent? If they can prove the marriage was entered solely to satisfy the inheritance requirement, with no genuine intent of permanence? Yes. The will specifically states the marriage must be in good faith and entered with the expectation of lifelong commitment. He laughed, a bitter sound. My uncle was nothing, if not thorough in his attempts to force me into domesticity. Then what do we do? Edmund pushed off from the door and crossed to the window, staring out at the lamplit gardens below. We do what we've been doing. We convince them they're wrong. We make this marriage look so genuine, so unmistakably real, that no one could possibly question it. For 3 more months, for however long it takes. He turned to face me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right, if we had to extend the arrangement, if the annulment had to be delayed to prove the marriage's legitimacy, could you do it? Could you continue this performance for longer than we agreed? The question landed like a stone in my chest. Extend the arrangement. More months of pretending, more nights lying awake in my separate chamber knowing Edmund was just down the hall, more mornings watching him over breakfast, and trying to remember that what I felt wasn't part of the contract. I don't have a choice, do I? I said finally. If Vivian succeeds, Violet loses everything. I lose everything. So yes, Edmund, I can extend the performance for as long as necessary. He studied me for a long moment, his gray eyes searching my face as if looking for something he wasn't sure he'd find. It wouldn't just be appearing in public together. If Bancroft is involved, if they're truly investigating, we'd need to make the marriage look real in every respect. Shared chambers, increased intimacy, the appearance of— He stopped, something flickering across his face. Of love? I finished softly. The appearance of being in love. Yes, the word hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us seemed willing to name. I stood, smoothing my gown with hands that trembled despite my best efforts to control them. Then that's what we'll do. Starting tonight, we'll return to that ballroom and we'll show them exactly what they expect to see. A duke and duchess who cannot bear to be parted. A marriage that is unquestionably, undeniably real. Edmund crossed to me in 3 strides. He took my face in his hands the first time he touched me like this, with such deliberate tenderness, and tilted my chin up until I had no choice but to meet his gaze. Eleanor, before we do this, before we cross this line, I need you to know something. What? I'm not sure I'll be able to go back. The admission was barely a whisper, but it struck me with the force of a shout. Not sure he could go back. To what? To distance? To pretending this was merely business? To the cold calculations that had brought us together in the first place? Edmund, don't say anything. Not yet. Just let me do this properly. Let me give them a performance they'll never forget. And then, before I could process what was happening, Edmund Carver, Duke of Kingsley, pressed his lips to mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't practiced or calculated. It was desperate and honest and terrifying in its intensity, like a dam finally breaking after months of pressure. His hands tangled in my hair, destroying the careful arrangement my maid had spent an hour perfecting. My own hands found his shoulders, then his neck, pulling him closer, even as some distant part of my mind screamed that this was dangerous, that this violated every rule we'd established. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, Edmund rested his forehead against mine. Now, he said, his voice rough with emotion, now we can return to the ballroom. And when they see us, when they see the way we look at each other, there won't be a soul in London who doubts this marriage is real. Because it was real. That was the terrible truth neither of us seemed ready to speak aloud. Somewhere, between the contract signing and this moment, between shared breakfasts and stolen glances, between proximity and longing, we had made it real. And in less than 3 months, that reality would destroy us both. Everything changed the morning I found Edmund's journal. I hadn't been searching for it. That was what made the discovery so devastating, its complete innocence. I had gone to his study looking for writing paper, nothing more. Violet had written asking about her upcoming season, and I needed to respond with reassurances I didn't entirely feel. Edmund was out riding, as he did every morning at dawn. The house was quiet except for the distant sounds of servants beginning their daily routines. His study door had been left ajar, an invitation I'd taken without thinking. The journal lay on his desk, open to a page dated 3 weeks prior. I should have turned away. I should have respected his privacy. But my own name caught my eye, written in Edmund's precise hand, and before I could stop myself, I was reading. Eleanor smiled at breakfast today. A real smile, not the practiced one she uses for guests. It transformed her entire face, made her look younger, less guarded. I found myself wanting to say something, anything, to make her smile like that again. This is dangerous. I know it's dangerous, but I cannot seem to stop. My hands shook as I turned back a page, then another. Week 16. I told myself I would maintain distance. I told myself this arrangement was purely practical. Yet I find myself listening for her footsteps in the corridor, timing my return from rides to coincide with her morning walk in the garden. Last night at the Pemberton dinner, Lord Ashworth made an inappropriate comment about Eleanor's figure. I nearly struck him. The violence of my reaction terrified me. I flipped further back, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Week 8. She doesn't know I watch her when she reads in the library. The way she tucks her hair behind her ear when she's concentrating. The small sound she makes when a passage moves her. I commissioned a portrait today. I told the painter it was for the formal gallery, but that's a lie. I simply want to be able to look at her face long after she's gone. The journal slipped from my fingers, landing on the desk with a soft thud. Edmund had been feeling this, whatever this was, for months. While I'd been torturing myself over my own inappropriate feelings, terrified I'd violated the terms of our contract, he had been doing the same thing. I thought I locked that drawer. I spun around. Edmund stood in the doorway, still in his riding clothes, his hair damp with morning mist. His face was carefully blank, but his eyes held something raw and wounded. The door was open. I came for paper, and I saw, the words tangled in my throat. Edmund, how long? How long have I been writing about you? He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Or how long have I been lying to myself about what this arrangement has become? Both. Either. I don't know. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady myself. You've been preparing annulment papers while writing about wanting me to stay. You've been maintaining distance while watching me in the library. Which one is real, Edmund? Which one is the lie? Both are real. That's the problem. He crossed to the desk, picked up the journal, held it like evidence of his own crime. Eleanor, I drafted those annulment papers because that was our agreement. Because you deserve your freedom and your funds and the life you were promised, not because I want you to leave. Then why not tell me? Why let me believe? I stopped, hearing the accusation in my own voice. I found that letter 4 months into our arrangement. 4 months of thinking this was one-sided, that I was the only one foolish enough to develop feelings that weren't part of the contract. Edmund's head snapped up. You have feelings? For me? It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, God help me, yes. I've tried to stop. I've reminded myself daily that this ends in, I calculated quickly, in 68 days. That, you'll sign the papers, I'll take my funds, and we'll both move on to the lives we were supposed to have. But trying hasn't helped. It just made everything worse. He set the journal down slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile thing was taking shape between us. 68 days. You've been counting. Of course I've been counting, haven't you? Every single one. His voice was rough. Eleanor, I need to tell you something about why my uncle wrote that will the way he did, about why 7 months seemed to matter so much to him. I waited, my pulse loud in my ears. My parents had what society called a brilliant match. Edmund began, moving to the window as if he couldn't bear to look at me while speaking. Title, fortune, impeccable lineage. They were also deeply, genuinely in love. I was 8 when my mother died in childbirth. My father never recovered. He went through the motions of living for another 6 years, but he was just empty. When he finally died, my uncle told me it was from a broken heart. Edmund, I swore I would never allow myself to be that vulnerable, to love someone so completely, that losing them would destroy me. My uncle knew this. He tried for years to convince me I was wrong, that love was worth the risk. On his deathbed, he made me promise I would at least try, that I would marry and give the relationship a real chance. 7 months, he said, to see if I could open my heart to someone. The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. So you found a woman who needed money, who would agree to a temporary arrangement, who would leave at the end without expecting anything more. You thought you could fulfill the letter of his will without risking the spirit of it. Yes. He turned to face me, and the anguish in his expression made my chest ache. But I underestimated 2 things. First, that my uncle was far more clever than I gave him credit for. He knew that 7 months of proximity, of shared mornings and quiet evenings, of slowly learning someone's habits and hopes, he knew it would be enough, more than enough. And second, that you would be you, Eleanor Wentworth, who reads poetry in lamplight and worries about her sister and maintains her dignity even when desperate, who smiles like sunrise and argues with me about agricultural reform and makes everything in this hollow house feel less empty. His voice cracked. I didn't account for the possibility that I would fall in love with you. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and perfect and terrifying. You can't, I whispered. Edmund, we have a contract, we have terms, we have 68 days. I know. He crossed to me, his movements slow, as if approaching something wild that might bolt. But I need you to understand something, Eleanor. Those annulment papers that you found, I had Felton draft them, because I thought that's what you wanted. Freedom, your funds, escape from a marriage you never chose freely. I was trying to give you what I thought you needed, even if it destroyed me. What I need, I said, my voice shaking, is for you to stop making decisions for me. Stop assuming you know what I want. Stop trying to protect me from choices I'm capable of making myself. Then tell me. He was close enough now that I could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from him. Tell me what you want. Before I could answer, the study door burst open. Violet rushed in, her face flushed and frightened. Ellie, you need to come now. There are men from the magistrate's office in the entrance hall. They're asking about the marriage. They have... She looked at Edmund, then back at me. They have the contract, our contract. Someone gave them the original document. The blood drained from my face. That's not possible. The contract is locked in Edmund's safe. No one has access. Bancroft, Edmund said, his voice deadly quiet. He must have had a copy from when we initially drafted it. Vivian's been planning this for weeks. Your Grace. Mrs. Pemberton appeared behind Violet, her usually composed face tight with worry. The gentlemen are insisting on speaking with you immediately. They say there are questions about the legitimacy of the marriage under your uncle's will. They've brought a barrister. Edmund's hand found mine, his fingers interlacing with my own, in a gesture that had become instinctive. Tell them we'll be down momentarily. When Mrs. Pemberton and Violet withdrew, Edmund turned to me. Eleanor, listen to me very carefully. If they have the original contract, they can see the terms, the 7-month duration, the financial arrangements, everything that makes this look like exactly what Vivian's been claiming, a business transaction designed to circumvent the will's intent. What do we tell them? The truth. He squeezed my hand. That the contract was how we began, but not where we ended up. That feelings developed that neither of us expected or planned for. That what started as an arrangement became something real. Will they believe us? I don't know, but Eleanor, he paused, his gray eyes searching mine with desperate intensity. I need you to know that regardless of what happens in the next hour, regardless of whether we lose the estate or face scandal or watch everything fall apart, I meant what I said. I love you. That's not part of any performance. That's not strategy or calculation. That's just truth. My throat tightened. Edmund, tell me later, after we face them, after we know what we're dealing with. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to my knuckles that felt like both promise and farewell. But know this, I will fight for you, for us, for the possibility of a future that looks nothing like the contract we signed. If you want that future too. I do, I whispered. God help me, I do. We descended the stairs together, hand in hand, to face whatever judgment waited below. But as we reached the entrance hall and I saw the stern faces of the magistrate's men, saw the official documents in their hands, and the satisfied smirk on Vivian's face as she stood in the corner, I realized that the real fight wasn't going to be convincing them our marriage was legitimate. It was going to be convincing them that love could grow from a contract, that something real could emerge from something false, that two people who had agreed to a temporary arrangement could choose to make it permanent. And we had less than 68 days to prove it. The lead official, a severe man with graying temples and cold eyes, stepped forward. "Your Grace, Mrs. Wentworth, I am Mr. Hartwick from the Lord Chancellor's office. We have reason to believe your marriage may constitute fraud in relation to the late Duke's testamentary wishes. You will need to answer some questions." Edmund's hand tightened on mine. "Of course, Mr. Hartwick, though I must protest this intrusion. My marriage is a private matter." "Not when it concerns an inheritance of this magnitude, Your Grace." Hartwick's gaze moved between us, assessing, calculating. "Now, I understand you have a contract, one that specifies a 7-month duration, after which an annulment was to be filed. Is this accurate?" The question hung in the air, like an executioner's blade. Edmund looked at me, I looked at him, and in that moment, I saw our entire future balanced on what we said next. "Yes," Edmund said clearly, "that was the original agreement. But then this marriage was entered under false pretenses," Hartwick interrupted. "A temporary arrangement designed solely to satisfy the will's requirements. That, Your Grace, is precisely the kind of fraud we are here to investigate." "You're wrong," I heard myself say. Every eye in the hall turned to me. "The contract was how we began, but it's not the whole story. And if you'll let us explain, if you'll actually listen, instead of arriving with your conclusions already drawn, perhaps you'll understand that sometimes the most real things begin with the most practical arrangements." Hartwick's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Very well, Mrs. Wentworth. Explain." And standing there in the entrance hall of Wentworth Manor, with Edmund's hand in mine, and our entire future hanging in the balance, I began to tell the story of how a cold contract became a confession of love. I spoke for 20 minutes without pause, and Edmund never let go of my hand. I told them everything: how my father's debts had consumed my late husband's modest inheritance, how Violet's future had hung in the balance, how I'd walked into that solicitor's office with nothing but desperation and pride. I told them about the contract, yes, but I also told them about the mornings. The first time Edmund asked about my sister over breakfast, I said, watching Mr. Hartwick's severe face for any sign of softening. He didn't have to. That wasn't in the contract. Neither were the books he left outside my chamber door, always ones he thought I'd enjoy, always with passages marked that he wanted to discuss. Neither was the way he stood between me and Lord Ashworth when that man made an inappropriate comment at dinner. Those things weren't obligation. They were choice. Edmund finished quietly. Everything Eleanor is describing was choice. Yes, we began with a contract, but every day after that first one, we chose to be more than what that paper required. Hartwick's expression remained impassive, but I noticed he was taking notes now rather than simply standing in judgment. Beside him, his assistant, a younger man with kinder eyes, was watching us with something that looked almost like sympathy. "That's a touching narrative, Your Grace." Vivian's voice cut through the moment like glass shattering. She stepped forward from where she'd been lurking near the stairs, her crimson gown a deliberate provocation. "But narratives are easy to construct when an inheritance is at stake. How convenient that you both discovered these deep feelings just as questions about legitimacy arose." "Lady Vivian," Edmund said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, "I will thank you to remember that you are a guest in my home, barely. A guest who has saved the late Duke's estate from being defrauded." She shot back. "Mr. Hartwick, surely you can see through this performance. They had a contract with a specific end date. They were preparing annulment papers. The Duke's own solicitor can testify to that. This marriage was never meant to be permanent, which makes it exactly the kind of arrangement the will was designed to prevent." "She's right about the annulment papers," I said, and felt Edmund go still beside me. Hartwick looked up sharply. Edmund did ask Mr. Felton to begin preparing them. I found the correspondence myself. That's actually what started all of this. Eleanor, Edmund's voice held a warning, but I squeezed his hand and continued. I found those papers 4 months into our marriage, and I was devastated because I'd been counting the days until our arrangement ended. Yes, but not because I wanted to leave, because I thought Edmund wanted me to. I thought I was alone in feeling that this had become more than a business transaction. I turned to face Edmund, no longer caring that Hartwick and his assistant and Vivian and half the household staff were watching. I've been in love with you since the night you defended me to Lord Pemberton, since you stood in the library and asked if I ever regretted our arrangement, since I realized that everything I thought I knew about you was wrong. Edmund's gray eyes held mine with an intensity that made the rest of the room disappear. Eleanor, let me finish, please. I turned back to Hartwick, though it cost me to look away from Edmund's face. Mr. Hartwick, I understand why you're investigating. I understand that a 7-month contract looks suspicious, but I need you to understand something about timing. Yes, Edmund prepared annulment papers, not because he wanted the marriage to end, but because he thought I did. He was trying to give me the freedom he assumed I wanted, the freedom to leave with my funds and my dignity and start the life I was promised. And the papers were never filed, Edmund added, his voice rough. I had them drafted, Eleanor found them, and we had the conversation we should have had months earlier about what we actually wanted versus what we thought we were supposed to want. Hartwick set down his pen. Your Grace, Mrs. Wentworth, I appreciate your candor, but you must understand my position. The late Duke's will was very specific. The marriage must be entered in good faith and with the intent of permanence. Your contract explicitly states a 7-month duration followed by annulment. That is not permanent. The contract stated that. I agreed. Our intentions changed. Doesn't that matter? In law, Mrs. Wentworth, initial intent is what determines fraud. If you entered the marriage knowing it would be temporary, knowing it was solely to satisfy the inheritance requirement, then the fact that you developed feelings afterward doesn't erase that original fraud. The words landed like stones. I felt Edmund's hand tighten convulsively on mine. Then we're ruined, I said softly. You'll contest the will, the estate will be forfeit, and everything we've done, everything we've become will have been for nothing. Not quite nothing, Hartwick said, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. There is one possible avenue. If you were to demonstrate that the marriage has indeed become permanent, not through words, but through binding legal action, it might satisfy the spirit of the will, if not the letter. I don't understand, Edmund said. Hartwick's assistant spoke for the first time, his voice gentle. Destroy the annulment papers, Your Grace. Publicly, make a legal declaration that the marriage will continue indefinitely, with no expiration date, no conditions. Remove any possibility of future dissolution. If you do that, if you commit to permanence, not just emotionally but legally, then we could argue to the Lord Chancellor that your uncle's requirements have been met. And Lady Vivian's accusations, I asked, would become moot, Hartwick said. Yes, the marriage began as an arrangement, but if it transforms into a genuine, permanent union before the 7-month mark expires, if you choose each other freely, with no compulsion or obligation, then there's no fraud. Just two people who found something unexpected. Vivian made a sound of protest, but Hartwick silenced her with a look. Lady Vivian, you have brought a legitimate concern to our attention, and we have investigated. But if the Duke and Duchess choose to make their marriage permanent, there is nothing in the law that prevents them from doing so, regardless of how the marriage began. This is absurd, Vivian hissed. They're manipulating. They're making a choice, Hartwick interrupted firmly, which is precisely what the late Duke hoped would happen. He was quite clear in his private correspondence, which I've reviewed, that he wanted his nephew to find love, not just fulfill a requirement. If love has indeed developed, then the will's deepest purpose has been served. He turned back to us. But I must be clear, this is all or nothing. If you make this declaration, there is no going back, no future annulment, no dissolution except through the normal channels of divorce, which, given your positions, would be scandalous and difficult. You would be binding yourselves together permanently. Is that something you're both willing to do? The question hung in the air between us, enormous and terrifying and perfect. Edmund turned to face me fully, both his hands now holding both of mine. Eleanor, you need to understand what he's asking, what I'm asking, because if we do this, I want it to be real, not a strategy to save the estate, not another arrangement with hidden terms. Real. I know, I whispered. If we make this declaration, you'll be the Duchess of Kingsley for the rest of your life, bound to me, to this house, to all the obligations and restrictions that come with the title. You'll lose the freedom you were promised, the clean ending, the chance to start fresh somewhere else. Edmund, and you need to know, he continued, his voice breaking slightly, that I want this more than I've ever wanted anything, that the thought of you leaving in 67 days makes it hard to breathe, that I love you so completely it terrifies me, just like my father loved my mother. I swore I'd never let myself be that vulnerable, and then you walked into my life with your pride and your strength and your ridiculous attempt to hide how much you care, and suddenly being vulnerable was all I wanted. He lifted one hand to cup my face, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. But I need you to choose this freely, not because of your sister's dowry or the estate or fear of scandal, because you want it, because you want me. I looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had offered me salvation and given me love instead, who had tried so hard to protect his heart and ended up giving it to me anyway, who stood here now, in front of witnesses and accusers, and asked me to choose him not out of necessity but out of desire. I want to tell you something, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, about choice. When I married Thomas Wentworth, I was 19 years old, and I chose him because he was kind and because my father approved and because it seemed like what I was supposed to do. It was a good marriage, a comfortable marriage, but it wasn't. I paused, searching for the right words. It wasn't this. What I feel for you, Edmund, is so far beyond anything I felt before that it's almost frightening. You're difficult and stubborn and far too accustomed to getting your way. You drink your coffee too hot, and you hide in your study when you're worried, and you absolutely cannot admit when you're wrong about agricultural policy. Edmund's lips quirked despite the tension. Is there a point to this litany of my flaws? The point is that I love you anyway. I love you because of them, not despite them. I love you because you see me not the role I play or the mask I wear, but the actual person underneath. Because you left books outside my door and defended my honor and wrote about me in your journal like I was something precious. I took a shaky breath. So yes, Edmund, I choose you, not because of the estate or my sister or any practical reason. I choose you because a life without you in it feels empty and gray, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Edmund made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled me into his arms. I heard applause, Mrs. Pemberton and some of the other servants had apparently been listening from the doorway, but it felt distant, unimportant compared to the feeling of Edmund's heart beating against mine. Mr. Hartwick, Edmund said, his arms still around me, his voice steady despite the emotion in it. Prepare whatever documents are necessary. I'll sign anything you require. The marriage is permanent. No annulment, no dissolution, no escape clauses. Eleanor is my wife, and if I have my way, she'll remain so until one of us dies. Hopefully not for many years, I added, and felt Edmund's chest shake with laughter. Hopefully not, he agreed. Hartwick nodded, something that might have been approval crossing his severe face. I'll need both your signatures on a formal declaration. We can prepare it within the week. Lady Vivian, I trust this resolves your concerns? Vivian looked between us, her face tight with fury and something else, something that looked almost like loneliness. This isn't over, she said, but the words lacked conviction. Yes, Edmund said gently, it is. I'm sorry, Vivian. I know you hoped for a different outcome, but this is where my heart belongs. She stared at him for a long moment, then turned on her heel and swept from the entrance hall without another word. The door closed behind her with decisive finality. When everyone else had dispersed Hartwick and his assistant to prepare documents, the servants back to their duties, even Violet tactfully retreating to give us privacy. Edmund and I stood alone in the entrance hall where this had all begun. 67 days, I said softly. We could have ended this in 67 days, gone our separate ways, kept our hearts safe. Instead, we're bound together for life. Edmund brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch achingly tender. Are you certain, Eleanor? Once we sign those papers, there's no going back. I've never been more certain of anything. I smiled up at him. Though I do have one condition. Name it. You stop trying to protect me from my own choices. Stop hiding your journal. Stop assuming you know what I need better than I do. If we're going to do this, if we're going to build something real, then we do it as equals. With honesty, with trust, with all the messy, complicated truth that comes with actually loving someone. Edmund's smile was slow and devastating. I can agree to those terms, though I make no promises about the journal. You looked quite beautiful in my descriptions. Edmund, he laughed and pulled me close again, and for the first time since this entire arrangement began, I felt completely, entirely at peace. I should warn you, Edmund murmured against my hair, being married to me won't be easy. I have committee meetings and parliamentary sessions and tedious social obligations. You'll have to attend them all now. No more hiding in the library. I think I can manage, I said, though you should warn the committee meetings that they're about to have a duchess with very strong opinions about land reform. God help them. We stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the morning light streaming through the tall windows. Outside, London continued its daily rhythm, carriages passing, vendors calling, life moving forward as it always did. But inside Wentworth Manor, everything had changed. What do we do now? I asked finally. Now, Edmund said, pulling back just enough to look at my face. We live. We have breakfast together every morning and argue about books in the evening. We attend balls and scandalize society by actually enjoying each other's company. We write letters to Violet about her season and manage the estate and figure out what it means to build a life together when you started by building a contract. That sounds perfect. It sounds messy, even better. Edmund laughed again, and I realized how rarely I'd heard that sound in the beginning, how common it had become. I love you, Eleanor Carver, Duchess of Kingsley. I love you too, I whispered, even though you drink your coffee too hot. Especially because I drink my coffee too hot. And there, in the entrance hall of Wentworth Manor, we kissed not as part of a performance, not to convince anyone of anything, but simply because we wanted to. Because we'd chosen each other, not out of desperation or necessity, but out of love. The contract that had brought us together lay forgotten in Edmund's study, its 7-month duration rendered meaningless by a choice that would last a lifetime. Sometimes, I would think, in the years that followed, the most binding agreements are the ones we make with our hearts rather than our signatures. And sometimes, the most real things begin with the most practical arrangements. If this story touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to Velvet and Vintage Tales. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story of love across time, because there are so many more tales waiting to be told from the ballrooms and manor houses of England's past. Comment below and tell me, would you have signed Edmund's contract? Would you have risked your heart on an arrangement that was never meant to last? I read every comment, and I love hearing your thoughts on these stories. Until next time, may you always believe that love can grow in the most unexpected places, even in the space between a signature and a promise, between what we plan and what we become, between a contract that says 7 months and a heart that says forever.